From the Nazi Communist EU Playbook. February 1, 2020 by Anna von Reitz. My father explained the difference between the Nazis and the Communists to me when I was just a little girl. The Communists, he said, steal everything, and then take responsibility for running everything. The Nazi Fascists steal everything, and then make you responsible for running and for paying for everything. The Fascists are obviously smarter, but there in a nutshell is the entire difference between the Communists and Fascists. And both are Socialists, that is, they are delusional. They think that violating the law of free will is an option, and that forcing people to accept the moral responsibility of helping unfortunate neighbors while siphoning off large portions of the largess for party hacks via racketeering is okay. It's the siphoning off large portions part you need to pay attention to, because that is what motivates all this garbage. I estimate that 98% of all foreign aid ever approved by the U.S. Congress was siphoned off either by intelligence organizations or, in recent years, directly by members of the Congress or the administration responsible for delivering these allocations. The Clinton Foundation's theft of 90% of the aid meant to help Haiti comes to mind. This is why both communist and fascist leaders sound and look so amazingly alike. Compare Nikita Khrushchev and Adolf Hitler. Hear the same overblown shouting rhetoric? See the same fist-banging? Now compare George Herbert Walker Bush and Nicolas Sarkozy. Much quieter, smoother, but still the same words, the same tone of voice, the same veiled menace. They look alike and sound alike, because they are alike. They are engaged in peddling the same lawlessness and the same delusions for the same reasons. And so it is with the European Union Commission and the DNC. Same thing. Same rhetoric. Same methods. Same sound coming out of both. They are recognizable and recognizably the same bunch of hoodlums, using the same methods, so, in the same way that you can recognize disco music or country western no matter which band is playing, you can recognize the perpetrators no matter which party hat they are wearing or which country they come from. What they really have in common is that they are criminals, sanctimonious criminals. Adam Schiff comes to mind. Here's a guy who has pulled every dirty trick in the book more than once, lecturing us on morality, and spinning off non-existent, as it happens, crime scenarios so effortlessly that we should all know that only a practiced criminal thinks this way off the top of his head. He is accusing Trump of doing things he would do himself. And which Joe Biden, obviously, actually did. And which Nancy Pelosi, John Kerry, and Mitt Romney all actually did, too. They peddled their influence to make billions with a B off of Ukraine paying them protection money, and now, they are scared because, 1, it's going to come out, and 2, they'll go to jail. An estimated 80% of the U.S. Congress is implicated. So get ready for martial law, but hint, it won't be a big change, because we have been under martial law since March of 1863, and new elections. These people all preach goodness and light and freebies to all, then use that as an excuse to strong-arm racketeer honest people out of their earnings and assets, then take 90% of it for themselves, and then, give 10% to the poor they were supposedly championing to begin with. It's a simple, predictable modus operandi, and holds true for both communists and fascists. Please note that central to the success of this scheme, the actual poor people have to be kept hungry and hopeful. The millions of desperate poor people who take the promises of these clowns seriously are needed to keep these criminals in office. So the poor must be kept poor, and the more downtrodden and angry, the better. And this is why the Democratic Party has so often had complete control in Washington, D.C., and why the Democratic Party so consistently fails to deliver on any substantial part of its promises to the poor, despite having the majorities to do so, despite having the credit stolen from those same poor people's labor to deliver on everything they promise to do, and never do. So these consummate hypocrites and liars take the stage and wump up a good-sounding speech full of platitudes and illusory promises, and the poor vote for them, hoping for relief, not knowing that these vicious morons are only intent on using the poor as an excuse for their own predatory activities. The candidates and party hacks know that 90% is theirs, so they are highly motivated to put on a good show. How stupid are we that we don't see through this and call it for what it is? The current sideshow with the impeachment trial is taken straight out of the Nazi Communist EU Playbook, too. The EU Commission has a long-standing practice of instigating as many as 4 layers of ongoing investigations into the same or closely related topics, that stretch on and get rolled over just like the never-ending should-be-dead Russian collusion hoax, and then magically disappear when a new commission takes over every 6 years. Poof. What Russian collusion? We are new here. Don't know a thing about it. Not surprising, the internal audit of the EU's books is one of those forever ongoing investigations that never gets signed off on by any auditor, not even their own internal auditors that are hired to do the books. With hundreds of billions of British pounds being poured into the EU every year, British basic industries languishing, just like in America, and British taxpayers being taxed into the poorhouse, literally losing their homes, just like in America, and British naval yards and fisheries emptied out after 10,000 years of dominating the seas, just like America, too, though with far more traditional standing in Britain, there's no wonder why Britain is choosing Brexit. The better question is, why did Britain ever join the EU in the first place, considering that it was always the odd man out, and no definitive clear benefit for Britain was ever on offer? Could it be that the British government is just as corrupt as the US government, and the whole point of joining the EU was to trash Britain's economy for the benefit of Germany and France, which have been united under a single foreign policy since the Treaty of Élysée in 1963? The question of which government, British or American, is more corrupt or which one went bad first is rather academic. The most recent round of deplorable criminality began during the reign of Queen Victoria and is contemporaneous with her alliance with the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha German Principality of Wettin, together with its close ties to the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. It started going spectacularly south with the scheme to enfranchise British workers, a form of impersonation and enslavement only allowed by the Roman Catholic Church in the modern world, and its Roman municipal pontifical government, that was engineered by Benjamin Disraeli as a means to finance the Raj in India. So we are treated to the spectacle of British and in 1933, American workers being enslaved to promote the enslavement of other people halfway around the world. All in the name of Christ. If Jesus were in a grave, he'd roll over in it. Anyway, whether you are a Brit or an American or an Aussie or a Frenchman or a German or a Swiss or an Italian or a Greek or an Irishman, or especially if you are Chinese and due to be the next menu item, it's time we all woke up. These bilkers have been defrauding the whole world since Hector was a pup, and though we can cite chapter and verse for the last 200 years and have access to records going much farther back into the annals of corruption, what we really need to focus on is right here and now. Using the proof as in the pudding test, we can observe that there was no good reason for Britain to join the EU in the first place. We can observe that America has been raped and pillaged, and Britain has been raped and pillaged, too, as if we were all in a conga line for the honor. Just picture Europe as a glutton with 2 drinks and 2 straws. We can observe that those benefiting from this were Germany and France and Luxembourg and Italy and Greece and Spain and Portugal and Switzerland and the Netherlands, Belgium, and, oh, yes, Israel, and in terms of siphoning, that singular Vichy French and Nazi institution, Deutsche AG, St. Gallens, Switzerland. Deutsche AG, St. Gallens, Switzerland, is the CIA, DVD, KGB dirty ops financier for the equally dirty Vichy French UN Corp, which is in charge of commercial mercenary operations for this same crime syndicate. Deutsche AG, St. Gallens, Switzerland, was owned and operated for decades by G.H.W. Bush, actual family name, Scharf, Mikhail Gorbachev, actual family name, Orbach, former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and Richard Ackermann, also German. But who, in the end, were they working for? The House of Wettin. The same German royal house that Queen Victoria allied herself with back in February of 1840, but currently being run out of Scotland by the Queen's cousin. And so, we come back to the unique role of Scotland. It was a Scottish commercial corporation that crept in and started operating as the United States of America, Incorporated, in the wake of the Civil War, and it's still trying to do the same thing, now, that is, impersonate us and pretend that it represents us, even though we have clearly told the world that it does not. And it was the Bank of Scotland that was part of the scandalous three-party fake account scheme involving an unincorporated Bank of Scotland and Lloyds Bank International, Limited, and HBOS plc, using offshore Jersey Island trusts in a clear-cut conspiracy to obligate thousands if not millions of Brits to pay taxes and mortgage fees they don't actually owe, and to at the same time, defraud millions of innocent investors who bought equally fake mortgage-backed securities based on these bogus accounts. Wells Fargo did exactly the same thing in America at the same time, September 2007, when Wells Fargo was owned by the Office of the United States Attorney General. People were led to believe that they were dealing with an actual bank, Wells Fargo Bank, but in fact, they were dealing with an unincorporated entity calling itself Wells Fargo, N.A., operated out of Arizona. Same exact shtick, only the fake accounts and trusts were placed offshore in Puerto Rico. Why all of this? To avoid taxation on their money laundering schemes and to saddle the taxpayers with more debt, thereby offloading their own corporate debt and bank liabilities. And why the involvement of the British territorial government's Department of Justice? Obviously, it has to do with the refunding of the U.S. government, corporations and the USD currency, and ongoing efforts to offload the bank's obligations onto the American taxpayers using the DTCC and its venal, foreign, and in all common law countries, grossly illegal, securitization schemes to do so. While most Americans slept peacefully in their beds back in 2010, and the members of the Municipal United States Congress just as quietly ordered 30,000 guillotines intended for use on us and our children as part of their plan to simply kill off their priority creditors, the Deposit Trust and Clearing Corporation, yes, the same villain that originally issued all the clearinghouse certificates, i.e., birth certificates issued against the good names and assets of municipal citizens of the United States by FDR back in 1933, announced that the Federal Reserve Board had approved its application to establish a DTCC subsidiary as a member of the Federal Reserve System, to operate a trade information warehouse to track over-the-counter (OTC) credit derivatives and act as a global depository for over-the-counter credit derivatives transactions. What this means in plain language is that the Federal Reserve, and all the good little presumed to exist American taxpayers which don't actually exist, became the guarantor of last resort for all the credit default swaps that are underwriting, insuring, the bogus Jersey and Puerto Rican and Maltese and Cyprus and Northern Mariana Island and etc., offshore trusts and public transmitting utilities and public charitable trusts and LLCs these madmen have created, in our names. Oh, and the DTCC? It operates this trade information warehouse as a surveillance operation under the guise of what else? A trust. Always a trust operated by those who deserve none. Under Timothy Geithner, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, alone, acquired a portfolio of admitted $500 trillion of these derivative assets that don't exist. The DTCC's obligation warehouse, the debt side of the clearing operation, would then track defaults, when the poor old taxpayer no longer pays for whatever reason, and reports this, so that the Federal Reserve can print more money out of thin air and further indebt the remaining SOPs and further devalue the USD. Which the Fed has been doing all winter long, to prop up the Wall Street financiers. And the point being? All of this is unlawful and illegal as sin. All of it. 5 American presidents beginning with Jimmy Carter and ending with Obama were granted immunity from the World Court, acting in collusion with the World Bank, thereby admitting that they were and are, including and most especially, the cute and now very elderly Jimmy Carter, who started the real crapola by transferring millions of American birth certificates to the IMF as fresh deposits in 1980, criminals seeking protection from their fellow racketeers and purported slave owners. Let's make this clear for everyone, the territorial government never had any authority to presume anything about the political status of Americans born in the states or to claim that civilian hospitals are or ever were federal enclaves, nor any right to conscript civilian doctors as uniformed officers within these United States. Even less have they enjoyed any right to presume that any American is or ever was a ward of their state organizations. That first step is all nothing but extortionate racketeering and mischaracterization of political status under known false presumptions, which is forbidden under both the Hague and Geneva Conventions. They followed this criminal action with unconscionable commercial contracts being foisted off on millions of trusting American mothers who were mischaracterized as unwed mothers and as informants and forced to sign undisclosed contracts surrendering title to their babies. Are you all getting the despicable nature of this? To the tender mercies of the state organization, for example, the state of Wisconsin. Let us all be clear, that this, too, is grossly unlawful, illegal, and immoral and is recognized as such by every international law and convention dealing with these subjects. Finally, they capped it off, by selling their presumed interest in us and our estates, which was entirely bogus in the first place, to the papist municipal government, which is responsible for impersonating us and creating all sorts of municipal corporate franchises operated in our names. Think, money laundering on an unimaginable scale. And this, my friends, is the source of all these derivatives that are the things being insured by credit default swaps, which are in turn insured by the what? By the labor and blood and bones of the American taxpayers, slaves that the Federal Reserve claims to own. Judging by the proliferation of these derivatives, lies, big, fat, lies, and the non-existence of most of the slaves attached to them, and the counterfeiting being done by the Bank of Scotland and Wells Fargo N.A. and all the fake accounts adding to the basic problem of criminality and gross dishonesty and disservice to the people of this country and the world at large, there is no way in hell that this situation can last. No matter what they do and no matter what they pretend. Beginning with Jimmy Carter's administration and ending with Obama's, 5 presidents and more United States Attorney Generals have had the option to shut this carnival show down, close the Federal Reserve, close the DTCC, close down the bogus Congresses masquerading as our Congress in Washington, D.C., and unsnarl this mess once and for all. To a man, they all chose to join the crooks and benefit themselves instead. Even Ronald Reagan, after a poorly executed assassination attempt. All of which underscores the plain fact that we are dealing with criminals and criminal enterprises and crime syndicates run wild at the highest levels of government, but especially in the European Union. A secretive collaboration between members of the Queen's government and the House of Wettin and other prime actors on the continent, have served to create a vast sucking sound as the scoundrels have siphoned the rest of the world, including Britain dry, and contrived to set up a totally lawless system of corporate feudalism, complete with an interlocking trust directorate involving over 700 of the world's largest corporations, all nicely hidden under illegal U.S. patents that are being protected for national security reasons. Right. One must always ask, which nation? It's not our nation, not our states, not our federation of states, not America doing any of this. We have been victims along with the rank-and-file Brits, Scots, and Irishmen, along with the Aussies, the Canadians, the French, the German people, the Russians, virtually everyone who isn't in on the scheme has been victimized, including the people of the Middle East and Africa and Japan, Mexico, China, Southeast Asia, and all of South America. We have all been impersonated and defrauded and de facto enslaved by these criminals in nice suits, speaking in cultured accents, pretending to be our representatives and champions. And now it's time to get our heads screwed on. Everyone born in America, within the borders of our states of the Union, is advised to record your correct political status as an American, a Minnesotan, Virginian, New Yorker, Californian, not any kind of U.S. citizen at all. Your Federation of States is still standing. The Queen's government is finally waking up. The Roman Catholic Church and the Roman municipal government are being taken to task. And more is coming. Run Don't Walk to www.theamericanstatesassembly.net. Please consider making a small donation to help support Anna von Reitz and the Living Law Firm, by visiting theamericanstatesassembly.net, scroll to the bottom and click on the Donate Now button. Thank you.